Greetings participants, welcome back to the Game Dev Arena YouTube channel. My first video back is going to be enabling 3D objects in Defold. Now I know I have been gone for 5 months, and that is for a good reason. I've been working on a lot of different things, from freelance projects to being a stay-at-home dad. So bear with me with getting more videos out. I am working on getting more things out. I've been working in Defold, CryEngine, Cocos 2DX. I even tried my hand at Armory 3D. So just trying a lot of different things as of right now. But the first and foremost, just being a stay-at-home dad has been keeping me very busy. So I've been able to post as many videos, but hopefully I'll start posting more and more as I go along these next couple of months. So one of the first things I'm going to do is create a texture that I'm going to import into Defold using GIMP. So our texture that we made in GIMP is going to be used to color our object once we get it placed into our scene here that you can see with our main.collection that's going to house all of our game objects to render onto the game screen. So we're going to go through, create a couple of game objects, and we're going to have those housed so that way we can add something to them, so that way our objects can be rendered into the game screen and displayed once we do build our project and produce a actual game window. So for keeping things organized, I am going to create a separate folder called Player, so that way anything pertaining to my player, I'm going to put in that folder. Before we continue, like the video if you're able to get a 3D object rendered in your game screen. Next thing we're going to do is create a model asset that's going to house our model information for our game object. So models in Defold have certain properties that you need to enable in order to get a model actually rendered. So our model is going to have the mesh property and the material property added on there. The material, we're just going to use the built-in model material because it basically has everything that we need. And then the mesh, we're going to use a built-in object as well, but the mesh will be just a simple object that you create in any design tool like Blender, 3ds Max, or Maya. We're going to create a render asset as well as a render script and a script. With the render asset, you're just gonna pick your main.render script as its parameter, so that way it's looking at the script that we're writing here in order to be able to produce what the game engine is gonna see and project onto the game screen. So that first line you saw me type in the render script tells the engine to look for any model tags that is produced with a material from your material asset to be able to know that that's what it's looking for. And then the next set of lines that you're seeing here being typed out is basically telling the render script everything that needs to be told about rendering 3D models onto the game screen. Now while I'm typing out the rest of these lines, just want to point out that this information you're actually able to find at the Defold website within its documentations. So you can definitely go follow along, kind of like what I did in order to get everything kind of up and running. I had to do a little bit extra research and figuring out things to get everything put directly correct. But you can definitely follow along that documentation and get a good idea on how to get a 3D object rendered in your game screen. Now I'm really hoping to really get everything going fast and up and running with 3D objects, because in my mind in particular, I feel like using 3D objects and assets and models is probably more suited for myself with creating things in Blender. I feel like I've been trying to do pixel art and 2D art and it's just not working like I thought it would for me. But I feel like if I really get it into making 3D objects, making 3D models, that I can really take off on creating a 3D game rather than trying to create a 2D game of like actual characters. Like I'm still gonna try to create a 2D game, but I ran upon wanting to create something 3D because I tried Armory 3D, and Armory 3D is basically a API that is added into Blender to make Blender and game engine, and it's allows you to do things in 3D. So I was trying to do things in 3D, it wasn't working. So I was like, let me go into Blender, I'll try it in there and see if I'm able to get it to work correctly. Now, hopefully you all have been able to follow along pretty good so far with getting everything up and running. Now, if you do have any questions or something doesn't work right, definitely leave a comment and let me know, and I'll definitely answer any questions you may have on the process and the workflow of getting 3D objects displayed in your game screen. And for those that happen to get everything up and running correctly after watching my video, definitely leave a like and share the video so that more and more people that use the Defold game engine can see the process and how to create a 3D environment within Defold. Now, I know there's a bunch of lines that have just been typed for rendering 3D models in Defold. I'm not going to go into in-depth detail on what each line does. You can kind of just look that up in the documentation to get a better idea, but just know that everything that is there is definitely used for creating a 3D object. The one thing that I will say is you'll see in about the middle of that code between everything is that render.draw. That is basically what's going to draw the models for your model predicate variable that you did in the initialization section of the render script. That render.draw is what's going to find the tag of your model material that's going to find your model to render everything onto the screen. So now we're getting into our script. Our script is what's going to tell the actual level, scene, environment, whatever the case. Basically, the main.collection, our script's going to tell it what is going to be rendered and how it's going to be rendered with what. In our case, we're going to be telling our game scene to use the camera projection as its main focus for projecting what's in the game screen, because you have to have a camera in order to render 3D objects in a Defold game. So make sure when you are writing the render script and the script that you're paying close attention to the syntax that you're using, because you got to make sure you have the parentheses in the right place. You got to make sure you have the curly braces in the right place. You got to make sure you have your quotes, your beginning and ending quote in the right place, because if you don't, the syntax will fall out of whack and you'll just receive a bunch of errors as you're trying to get the project to render and build. So make sure you're paying close attention to getting all the syntax done correctly, so that way you don't have to continue going back and trying to figure out what's going wrong. So this next step is very important because it involves the camera. You want to make sure your camera its Z position is greater than 0, so that way you're actually able to see your objects, because your objects should be at a Z position of 0. At least for the purposes of this video, my player game object is set to 0, but basically I have the camera at 10, so anything less than 10, your camera should be able to pick up the object that's in its view. So as you can see, we got our game object and it is displayed in our game window. And once you've gone through all those steps, you're able to see that we have a 3D object in our game window. With that, it's game over.